Good morning, my brothers and sisters in the Lord. Today our station church is St. Paul Outside the Walls.
So today's station church, St. Paul Outside the Walls, is a very important building. And because of that, I'm going to try to limit myself to only talk about three things. Now, the first thing, and probably the most important thing, is that this is the burial site of St. Paul. Now, as most of you probably know, St. Paul was the great persecutor of the faith before he was converted and became the great evangelist, going out to the corners of the known world to proclaim the gospel. Eventually, he was brought to Rome, and because he was a Roman citizen, he was decapitated, which was a more merciful death than something like crucifixion. And so he was killed at Trefontane, and then after that, his body was brought to this site, buried, a small tomb was made. And then immediately after Christianity was allowed, there was a church that was built on this spot. Originally, it was a small church, and then they made it much, much bigger. And that actually brings me to the second thing that I want to talk about, just the sort of the broadness of this church. As you go in, like the first thing you'll notice is that this is a massive open space. Unlike many of the other basilicas that are filled with great pictures and great portraits, when you first walk in, it seems rather stark. It seems rather empty. And I think this was done deliberately because as you approach the altar, as you go through the actual basilica and enter into the place of worship, then you enter into this place of great beauty, this place of mosaics and of frescoes. And I think that's the sort of a spiritual lesson here, that as we go forth from the world, as we go forth from where we are and enter into the presence of God, we enter into a thing of great beauty. We leave the sort of stark emptiness and go into the magnificence of God's beatitude. So that's the second thing I want to talk about. The third thing that I want to talk about is probably one of the more noticeable things, is if you go and look around the top of the church, you can see the various pictures of the popes. You have all of the popes throughout history on the walls. In fact, there's a couple of times where there was multiple popes that were elected at the same time. And even though they were anti-popes, their picture was still put up in this church. And I think there's a profound spiritual lesson here, that there is an unbroken chain going all the way back to St. Peter himself, uniting us with the Prince of the Apostles, who is Peter, and also the great evangelist, who is Paul, both of these figures here present.
Anyways, my brothers and sisters, may God continue to bless you during your Lenten pilgrimage, and hopefully I'll see you around.